1, buy for cash flow, not appreciation. 2, put long-term debt on properties. And 3, have adequate cash reserves.
Hi, welcome everyone to another best ever short video. I'm joined by Joe Fairless again, who just got done with his morning run. And Joe, I wanted to ask what you kind of covered in a previous video about Robert Kiyosaki when he said the whole thing about there's an apartment bubble, which if you're watching, it's on our YouTube channel as well as our social media platforms, youtube.com/bestevershow. Social media platforms show up at the end of this video. And you had 3 principles for how you look to buy real estate that made you not concerned about an apartment bubble that may or may not be on the way. What were those 3 principles?
I call them the 3 immutable laws of real estate investing. And as far as, you know, a bubble may or may not happen, or we may or may not be in one, I just don't try to predict what's going to happen. I do set up my business so that we mitigate risk as much as possible when a correction does take place. Because it will take place. I just don't know when. Nobody knows when. The 3 immutable laws of real estate investing. 1 is buy for cash flow, not appreciation. And by the way, these 3 were based on the thousands of interviews I've done on my podcast, and it's based on listening to what people say whenever they describe how they lost whatever they lost in 2008, and just listen to that and then seeing that there's some themes. So 1 is buy for cash flow, not appreciation. That's different than forcing appreciation, which we do. And when you force appreciation, you renovate the interiors, or you renovate something, or you do something that adds value, and you increase the rent, which increases the value, or you maybe optimize expenses, etc. But if you just buy for appreciation, and meaning that you buy and you hope that the market continues to go up, and you're not cash flowing, well then you're setting yourself up for failure. So 1, buy for cash flow, not appreciation. 2 is put long-term debt on properties. For example, in 2008, if your loan became due, well, that's a very inopportune time where you don't have a loan and you have to get financing because there was no financing, or the financing was astronomically high, relatively speaking, interest rates. So the cash flow, it didn't cash flow and you lost the property. Therefore, if you put long-term financing or debt on the property, then you'll be able to ride out the storm, assuming that you have a cash flowing property and you didn't buy for appreciation. Now, on our projects, if we have a fixed loan, then great. But if we have a floating interest rate, well, there's some risk associated with that. Therefore, we buy a cap on that floating interest rate so that the interest rate cannot go past a certain level.
You can do that?
You can do that. Yep. So when we enter into our projects, we know exactly what the worst case scenario is on the interest rate hike. And we can run, and we do run, a sensitivity analysis prior to the deal getting under contract so that we know, okay, worst case scenario, we get a floating rate, here's the cap, here's what it would go up to interest rate wise, and here's what it would look like, here's what the project would look like. And then lastly, when you buy for cash flow, number 1, number 2, you have long-term debt on the property. Lastly, number 3, if you have adequate cash reserves, then if something were to take place that is unexpected, like 4 or 5 boilers go out at once, or a snowstorm comes and freezes the pipes, water, pipes burst, etc. Hurricane, Sure, you have insurance, but what about the money to float the property while your insurance company fulfills their duties? Or what if the insurance company does not fulfill their duties and they say, well, you're not covered, and then you have to take them to court, and then you have to spend money not only on renovating the property but then also legal fees to fight the insurance company for a policy. And by the way, that's not a hypothetical scenario. That is a scenario that has happened with an investor I know. His name's George Newberry. He's got the book Burn Zones. Highly recommend. I'd say that's mandatory reading for any apartment investor. Book
Picked
Burn
it up.
Zones.
Haven't read it yet.
It's great. If you pick that up, or when you buy that book, if you don't read the whole thing, then just read the chapters about that story where he had over 4,000 units and he lost them all. Now, he did other things that were mistakes, like he connected each of those properties together, and he had personal guarantees across each of them, so when one defaulted, it was a domino effect. We don't do that. They're all isolated. But he did have to go and go to court with an insurance company. He eventually won the lawsuit, like $30 million or something, but it cost $50 for all the repairs and things, because the apartment community, just needed a lot of work. Lost it all. Had to start over. So having adequate cash reserves, and you can't really prepare for that scenario other than, well, actually you can have insurance, number one, but number two, have each of the properties isolated versus a domino effect. So those are the three. One, buy for cash flow, not appreciation. Two, put long-term debt on properties. And three, have adequate cash reserves. You do that, nothing's bulletproof, but you certainly are mitigating risk. And if you ask any investor who lost significant stuff in the downturn, the last downturn, listen to why they lost it. And, oh, the values went down. Well, if the values went down, why does that really matter if you're cash flowing? Who cares? Hold on to it. Oh, well, yeah, they weren't cash flowing. Bingo. There you go.
There's the real reason. So I have some follow-up questions. It's not going to go in order of your three because they're still fresh in my mind. The opposite way. You will conservatively figure out the highest interest rate, worst case scenario. Do you also say, okay, well, if that happened and rents go down, do you do that? Yeah, because we do many variables. We look at what it would be an exit. What would happen if the exit cap rate were XYZ, and we'd run a scenario there. What would happen if rents, premiums, or really it's the overall income that's collected is a certain amount. What would happen if interest rates do a certain thing? When interest rates go up, though, it's likely that rents are going to be similar to what they're at least, because it's going to be tough to get financing for a house. Get a home, Right, so that's going to increase demand on the existing units, and if interest rates are high, there's probably not as much new supply coming on the market because they're not getting favorable financing. Right, so there's a trade-off. But on the flip side, or on the downside, if interest rates go up, when we go to sell our property, we're not going to have as big of a buyer's pool, or that buyer's pool won't be able to pay as much because lending will be more expensive. Therefore, we won't be able to exit at a high of a price as we would if interest rates were lower. So all sorts of trade-offs. It's virtually impossible to go through every single scenario, but ultimately, those are the three things that we want to keep in mind, and approach accordingly. Okay. And the second one is having long-term debt in place. What do you consider long-term debt? Depends on the project business plan. If the project's business plan is 3 years, then have at least 5 years. If
the project's business plan is 5 years and you have 5 years, well then you should do something after year 2 or in year 3 with the existing debt to either refinance out or sell or put a supplemental loan in place, or actually not sell, either refinance out into a longer loan or sell. Because if you wait until, if it's 5-year play with a 5-year loan, if you wait until year 4 to figure it out, boy, you're at the mercy of whatever the market's at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a risk. That's a big risk.
Yeah, definitely. Lastly, do you consider the way you named it or any of these in any order of importance, or are they all equally important?
I'd say well,
I was thinking maybe the cash flows.
Yeah, 1 and 2 stand out slightly more than number 3. Because I think so number 1 was buy for cash flow, not appreciation. Number 2 is have long-term debt. Number 3 is have adequate cash reserves. And by the way, the amount of cash reserves varies depending on the project, depending on the size. Perhaps talk to your property management partner and ask them, hey, what is a good amount that we should have in reserves for this type of product in this type of market. But number 1 and number 2 stand out as slightly more important, because with number 3, I feel like if you're resourceful enough, you can get access to cash. But number 1 and number 2, if you bought a property that's not cash flowing, you're in trouble. If you buy a property where the loan becomes due and it's 2008 all over again, good luck.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing your 3 immutable laws of real estate investing.
You got it.
Got it? Okay. And everyone watching, thank you for watching. For more tips, you can sign up for the newsletter we send out every week at bestevernewsletter.com.